Hello and welcome to my Darwin's Medicine seminar. Today we're going to be talking about disruptive innovation. We're going to bust a few myths and we're going to look at what makes disruptive innovation possible. And then we're going to come to a practical conclusion about what you need to do if you want to become a disruptive innovator. Like all my seminars, today's is aimed at strategists in the pharma, medtech and other life sciences industries. If you find it interesting, then please subscribe, like and share with your colleagues. And if you'd like to know more, then please mail me and we can set up a virtual cup of tea. So we humans are very susceptible to myths. They give us easy ways to understand difficult things, they embed ourselves in our minds and they shape how we think. This is even true in the hard-nosed world of business. So if you think about the myth of Apple's infallible innovation and Amazon's ruthless efficiency, they've all been elevated from case studies into fables that are very rarely challenged. And one of the most powerful business myths is that idea of disruptive innovation. The term was coined in Clayton Christensen's influential book in 1997, and it's since become a powerful meme. Disruptive innovation is used to describe a radical product development, usually from a startup that is different from ordinary innovation. But this is a dangerous myth because it leads us away from a coherent innovation strategy and makes us vulnerable to hypes and fads. To help you avoid this, I'm going to describe disruptive innovation and what it really is, the misconceptions that surround it, and why firms differ in their ability to innovate disruptively. Finally, I'll examine how your firm can improve its own disruptive innovation capability. The concept of disruptive innovation can trace its roots back to Schumpeter's ideas of creative destruction, 1942, and even all the way back to Marx's Communist Manifesto in 1848. Academics still argue about the precise definition, but the clearest one is that used by Christensen. It is a process by which a product or service takes root initially in simple applications at the bottom of the market and then relentlessly moves up market, eventually displacing established competitors. Just think for a moment what that really means. First, it means that disruptive innovation usually starts when an existing technology already meets most customers' needs. Secondly, new technology then emerges, which, although it's still inferior in terms of mainstream performance, offers some advantages to some small part of the market. The most obvious example of this, of course, is cellular telephony. When mobile phones first emerged, landlines had far better coverage, they were more reliable, and they were much cheaper. But despite this, the new product category established itself with a tiny subsegment of people who valued mobility, and from there, as the new technology developed, it spread itself to the rest of the market, and of course it's now become ubiquitous. And when you think about disruption this way, it creates what Christensen called the innovator's dilemma. Should I focus on my big, lucrative current market, or the small, less valuable new market that might overtake me? Examples of disruptive innovation have been studied in many markets, from hard drives to the healthcare delivery. And yet, much confusion remains around the subject. And in particular, 4 great myths about disruptive innovation make it difficult for executives to apply the concept in practice. The first myth is that disruptive innovation is about products. And although almost all discussion of disruptive innovation concerns some new product or new technology, this ignores many of the most important examples. Christensen himself, in his second book, widened it to include not only technologies, but also services and business models. Spotify, Netflix and Amazon are all examples of this. The reality is that disruptive innovation is not only about products, but also about services and business models. The second myth is that disruptive innovation must be a radical new innovation. Some of the most poorly informed discussions about disruptive innovation occur in relation to high-tech industries such as information technology or biotech. In those examples, disruption is assumed to be about a discontinuous leap forward in a single technology like CRISPR or AI. Yet many examples of disruptive innovation, like the cellular telephony example we talked about earlier, or the smartphone. These are all results of many small incremental advances being assembled together. The truth is that disruptive innovation can result from either a single technological leap or from the convergence of many small innovations. And more often than not, it's the latter, not the former. The third myth is that all cases of disruptive innovation are similar to each other and completely different from the alternative of continuous innovation. But there's been a lot of research since Christensen's book, and that's identified many differences between different cases of disruptive innovation. They can be high or low price, they can be business to business or consumer, they can either enhance current capabilities or make them obsolete. Again, the truth is different from the myth. Disruptive innovation is a heterogeneous phenomenon that can blur into continuous innovation. There isn't a cut-off, a line between continuous and disruptive innovation. The final and probably most common myth is that disruptive innovation is usually a David and Goliath story when a feisty startup kills a big ponderous incumbent. But this myth ignores many important examples of disruptive technologies that were commercialized by market leaders, such as IBM and the personal computer. In truth, big firms are as capable of disruptive innovation as small firms, and often they have better resources to market them. These four myths make it harder to be a disruptive innovator, and just as important, they distract from what we do know about why some firms are better at disruptive innovation than others. So once we've dispelled the myths about disruptive innovation, what do we know about how it happens? Well, there's a lot of vague talk about DNA and culture, but the best research in this area points to four things that enable disruptive innovative behaviour. The first is cognitive framing. How a firm views and defines its situation, its cognitive framing, influences how well it understands the market situation. Disruptive innovation often requires seeing the market in ways that differ from traditional framing. So the ability of a firm to reframe how it sees the market shapes its ability to be a disruptive innovator. The second is organisational routines. So these are agreed and established sub-processes, organisational routines, that underpin all corporate activity, including innovation. Disruptive and sustainable innovation, however, often require different and conflicting organisational routines, especially the routines that go on in R&D and in marketing. So the rigidity or flexibility of a firm's organisational routines help to determine its disruptive innovative capabilities. The third enabler is resources and assets. A firm's capabilities of any kind rests on its tangible and intangible resources and assets, from money to intellectual property to knowledge assets. A firm's particular stock of resources and assets is largely due to its history, and that may or may not match what is required for disruptive innovation. So a firm's ability to be a disruptive innovator is often the result of the path that it followed in the past and its ability to reshape its resources and assets. The fourth and final point is organisational structure. Structure follows strategy. So a firm's current arrangement of divisions and departments and how they're connected usually reflects its historical strategy. Now that structure is important because the structure of an organisation shapes the flow of information and resources within it. But the way that information and resources flowed in the past may not be what's needed for the disruptive innovation today. So a firm's ability to restructure also shapes its ability to be a disruptive innovator. Becoming a disruptive innovator begins with dispelling the four myths and grasping the four truths that I described earlier. Then it depends on understanding and using the four shaping, enabling factors that I've just described. There isn't a single best way to do that. What works is whatever fits your firm's particular situation with respect to cognitive framing, organisational routines, resources and structures. Now, small, young firms seem to be like children. Sometimes they find it much easier to change to new circumstances, but it is not impossible for more mature firms to change. But in bigger firms, especially those with a long history, using those four enabling factors typically requires organisational change. There are several ways to attempt this. For example, firms may choose to set up an autonomous sub-organisation that leaves behind the historical constraints. So Lockheed's famous Skunk Works was an example of this. Or they may choose to reorganise internally to enable new framing and new routines. Some pharma companies' reorganisation of their R&D into smaller units was a version of this. Or firms may attempt to obtain new routines and new resources and new perspectives via alliances or acquisitions from outside, in other words. So when firms enter into partnerships with other firms, that's what they're doing. In practice, it seems disruptive innovation often requires a carefully judged blend of these three approaches. But any approach only works if firms give up the mythology of disruptive innovation and replace it with the habits of cognitive framing, building new routines, resource development, and restructuring, the things we've talked about in this seminar. In short, disruptive innovation begins with disrupting your own organisation. If you'd like to know more about what we've talked about today, then you can find over 300 articles at my website, which is in the links below. Better still, let's have a virtual cup of tea together. I'm always interested to hear from people who, like me, are fascinated by strategy, business models, and the evolution of the life sciences industry. Drop me a mail and we can set that up.